Order. Welcome to meeting number 89 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and therefore members are attending in person in the room as well as virtually through Zoom. I'd like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses as well. Before speaking, please do wait until I recognize you by name. You may speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of sound feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. With regard to a speaking list, the committee clerk and I will do our best to maintain a consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they're participating virtually or in person. Now, pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Wednesday, November 8th, 2023, the committee will resume its study of Canada's diplomatic capacity. Now I'd like to welcome our witnesses from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. We have Mr. Balkan Devlin, who of course is well known to many of you. He is the director of the Transatlantic Program at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. We also do have two witnesses from the Société Nationale d'Acadie. We're grateful to have Mr. Martin Thiberge, who is the president, as well as Ms. Véronique Mallet, who's the executive director. So Mr. Devlin and one of the witnesses from the Société Nationale, you each have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will go to members for questions. If you do see me holding this up, that means we'd like you to wrap it up within 10 to 20 seconds. So we will start off with Mr. Devlin. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to give evidence to the Committee on the current state and the future of Canada's diplomatic capacity in a turbulent world. The geopolitical landscape has undeniably transformed in the past decade. The return of great power competition to the center stage, particularly between the United States and the People's Republic of China, the rise of regional powers such as India and Turkey as more assertive actors in international politics, democratic backsliding across the world, the emergence of an authoritarian axis between China, Russia, and Iran, and of course, the return of major war to Europe with Russia's unprovoked and illegal war of conquest against Ukraine, just to name a few of the key developments we witnessed in the past decade or so. Here is the unfortunate reality. It is likely to get worse in the coming years. What can Canada do in such a world? I'd like to offer the following observations today in the time allocated to me. National interest should be the lens through which Canadian foreign policy should be formulated and pursued. Thanks to our fortunate geography, Canada's national interest manifests itself mainly in the two key directions in foreign policy and foreign affairs. First, our relationship with the United States is of paramount importance to Canada's security and prosperity. In fact, it is existential. Maintaining and cultivating this special relationship, regardless of who is in power in Canada and the United States, must be the first priority. It cannot be taken for granted, and we cannot afford to be complacent and assume all will be well. Canada is and should remain a good friend and a reliable ally to the United States, and be able to demonstrate this fact in words and deeds. Second, as a trading nation, our prosperity heavily depends on a well-functioning, stable, and open international order. Canada should do its part in defending and maintaining such an order. This, in practice, means working with our allies and partners in multilateral and minilateral settings and contributing to their prosperity and security. Doing so, however, requires bringing something tangible to the table, rather than just words that enhance others' security and prosperity. In Canada's case, let me suggest that our natural resources, from energy to agriculture to critical minerals, are our biggest advantage and leverage. Canada is in most cases in the top 5 in terms of production, reserves, or exporting when it comes to what the world wants and needs. Having the necessary infrastructure, policies, and capabilities to get these resources to the world markets in order to reduce our allies' and partners' reliance on authoritarian or unstable regimes for their energy security and critical mineral needs that are essential for energy transition, while helping to feed the world's most vulnerable, should be a foreign policy priority. This is an area that Canada can make a difference in the world while increasing our prosperity. I'd like to conclude by saying that interest-based foreign policy does not mean ignoring values. In fact, interests are downstream from values. Our fundamental national interest is the protection of Canadians' security and prosperity. But it is not only limited to physical security and material well-being. It is also about our ability to continue to enjoy and practice our way of life, including values and rights, such as the rule of law, human rights, democracy, free markets, and freedom of expression, press, and assembly. Defending them against threats, foreign and domestic, is in the Canadian national interest. This means working with allies and partners in international fora with intention and not blindly following the convention. We should identify those multilateral organizations that continue to advance our interests and double down on them. At the same time, we should have a hard look at which tables we do not need to be at and leave them when they no longer serve our purposes. It also means thinking creatively about international groupings, including unilateral arrangements of like-minded states centered around specific issues. To quote from a recent piece I wrote with 2 other co-authors, Canada needs to pivot its approach to global engagement. While there is pride in our traditional image of being a cooperative country, the reality is that trying to be everywhere often means being nowhere. With limited resources, we must take a discerning stance on where to invest Canada's energies and make sure that the intended results are achieved. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Devlin. We now go to the Société Nationale de l'Acadie, and you have the floor. You have 5 minutes.
Merci.
Thank you for giving us the floor to explain the Société Nationale de l'Acadie's position. The Société Nationale de l'Acadie, the SNA, is Canada's oldest francophone organization. Since 1881, we bring together and defend the interests of the Acadian people. We are a nonprofit federation that brings together the 4 main francophone associations and the 4 youth organizations of the Atlantic provinces, as well as many members in Quebec and all over the world where Acadians are. Our purpose is unique in Canada. The SNA represents a linguistic community and promotes and defends the rights and interests of a people in its own right. Our presentation today is directly related to a brief that we submitted in August 2022 under the Official Languages Support Program, OLSP. We have submitted a copy to the clerk for your reference. You will hear me refer to civil diplomacy throughout my presentation. Civil diplomacy is the idea of soft power. It's a diplomacy that complements that of governments operating in various fields such as culture, mobility, and exchanges, particularly with regards to youth education, the arts, and the economy. As powerfully expressed by Kosovo's Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and Diaspora at the Citizen Diplomacy Summit in 2022, civil diplomacy rests on the fact that, and I quote, citizens can play a vital role in promoting the goals of our department. They can be very powerful promoters to increase our acceptance in the digital realm, build our economy, and connecting us with the rest of the world. End of the quote. Acadia has a long history of international diplomacy, dating back mainly to the 60s. It was during a historic meeting with General de Gaulle, then President of the French Republic, that the SNA forged a special relationship with France, relationship that has grown steadily regardless of the governments in power for over 60 years. 2 years ago now, a large Acadian delegation was received at the Palais d'Élysée by French President Emmanuel Macron, the only Canadian delegation to be received at the Élysée since 2017. On this occasion, and in response to the invitation extended to him, President Macron has pledged to come to Canada in 2024 as part of the World Acadian Congress to be held in Nova Scotia next August. Last October in Paris, I had the honor of signing the renewal of the France-Acadia Agreement with the Secretary of State for Francophonie and International Relations of the French Republic, making the SNA the only non-governmental entity in the world to sign a bilateral agreement with France. Since 2001, the SNA has also had a bilateral agreement with Wallonie-Bruxelles International for a relationship with French-speaking Belgium. We are convinced that such links can help to considerably strengthen Canada's ties with its closest allies and partners. The SNA became, since 2005, an official international non-governmental organization of the Francophonie and actively contributes to the OIF's monitoring committee. The SNA regularly participates in Francophonie summits as part of Canada's accompanying delegation, reinforcing Canada's leadership at the OIF. In 2021, the SNA was also recognized as a non-governmental organization in partnership officially with the UNESCO. Atlantic Canada's Acadia is also in a unique geopolitical situation in Canada, since just a few nautical miles off its coast lies the French archipelago of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, whose population shares part of the Acadian history and heritage. This specificity has led the SNA to take part actively in the Joint Commission for Regional Cooperation between Atlantic Canada and Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, in which it plays a leading role. The SNA also plays a leading role in its relations with Louisiana's community in the fields of culture, French language teaching, and youth mobilization. Everywhere, we are setting an example of a stateless people with a strong civil society, a leader in community governance, youth leadership, and development. A player particularly well equipped to share its experience and know-how around the world. Our actions and the tools we've developed to promote our culture and our artists, to encourage Francophone immigration and the mobility of our youth are second to none in the country. However, Canada does not currently have a civil diplomacy strategy, and the Department of Foreign Affairs has still not re-established a policy that adequately reflects linguistic duality. As requested in 2004, Canada's Commissioner of Official Languages in a study on the demise of the Public Diplomacy Program, PDP. And we want to recognize our projects for dealing with linguistic duality. The program's operations are based on partnerships. We are hoping to see our civil diplomacy efforts recognized at their fair value at the new action plan in civil of official languages, given that the new official languages commits the FAAE for the first time. In view of the important contribution of civil diplomacy to development of Canadian people, we recommend that the Government of Canada develop a civil diplomacy strategy and that we promote French abroad. It is time for the federal government to recognize this work and give us the means to do it. Thank you very much.
We start off with MP Hobach. You have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses, for being here in person. It sure makes it a lot easier than over Zoom. I think I'll start with you, Mr. Devlin. Do you think the skill sets at foreign affairs or global affairs now are the same as what was required in 2015 as of 2022? Like, do you think our roles that the embassies serve abroad should be functioning in the same manner, or has things changed?
I would thank you very much for the question, honourable member. I would argue that it is, as the saying goes, personnel is policy, and you need to have the proper set of skills as well as resources given to those people to be able to pursue those goals and aims that the Government of Canada provides. The world is not the same as we had in 2015. It has not been the same, at least over a decade, but it is definitely not the same in the past 8 to 10 years. So what we really need is to be able to provide, first and foremost, a clear direction from the government of Canada to its diplomatic corps and its associated employees, both here in Canada and abroad, to be able to target it. And that requires a clear overview of what needs to be done, what are the skills that needs to be today employed, and whether the existing skills actually match the needs that Canada have today. And we cannot know without having a proper review of foreign policy.
So if the policy's right, if they're properly instructed on what the policy should be, then they should have the skill sets within the embassy or within global affairs to execute that policy. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
And do you think, as you're bringing in new employees into global affairs, do you think the skill sets should be modernized and changed, reflecting today versus 20 years ago?
Absolutely. We need to be paying attention. We need to be much more agile in terms of how we draw from this diverse population that we have in Canada, both in terms of linguistic and cultural abilities, but also technical skills. And we need to modernize the way that Canadians can engage and contribute and serve their nation without necessarily having to go through 24-month process of including people in. We need to be much more agile to provide others to be able to contribute and get in.
That's right. I only got 5 minutes or 6 minutes. I don't mean to be rude. So then, do you think it's fair then we should have more Canadians taking education abroad and coming back into global affairs instead of just feeding through Canadian universities?
I think it is important that more and more Canadians need to expand their horizons and have international experience. That together with the existing multicultural nature of our nation, would enhance Canada's understanding of others, their interests, and how those interests actually intersect with ours. You cannot really do foreign policy from Ottawa. You need to be out there and understanding those issues.
Interesting. I was down in the U.S. a couple weeks ago talking to a group of master's students from Canada, and they actually felt that unless they went to Ottawa U or Carleton, they would not get into global affairs because they think differently. Is that a standard opinion? Would you agree with that comment?
I do not know enough about the specific requirements that the Global Affairs does when it engages in personnel policy, but I would argue that we can have a sense of, by looking at where the people working for Global Affairs Canada did their work, university and graduate work, and can have a view on that from that empirical perspective.
How often do you think we should review locations of missions, embassies, facilities like that? Is that something that should be constantly under review, or is that something that should be done in a 5-year pattern, or are we good the way it is?
I would suggest that it, again, follows through by clearly defining what our national interests are, where we need to focus our resources, and where should we have our embassies and presence to advance those interests. As we plan them, we need to be regularly reviewing our ability to conduct foreign policy and advance our interests, and necessarily shift resources to pursue them, rather than stuck in because we have been in a place for 25 years.
Okay, so when the minister comes out and says things like in the statement she did a couple weeks ago about being honest brokers and being very active, do you think we're spreading ourselves too thin? Do you think we're trying to do too much and not having a bang on anything?
I would say that we are spreading ourselves too thin, yes. And I don't think that, especially today with the rise of regional powers and others, this is not the world of 1960s or 70s. Honestly, no one is really looking towards Canada to be an honest broker. You need to be able to bring something to the table, to be able to have influence and contribute meaningfully to the interests, both security and economic interests, of other countries, for them to listen to you. So we cannot, continue to lecture others and pretend that we are bringing something to the table.
So if you don't have natural gas to sell, if you don't have petroleum products to sell, if you don't have critical minerals to sell, What does Canada have for leverage right now if we don't take advantage of the natural resources we have in place?
That's why I, suggested that we should use our biggest leverage, that is our natural resources, that will not only contribute to the prosperity and security of our allies and partners, but also contribute to Canadian prosperity, and at the same time elevate the suffering of the world's most vulnerable. And therefore, we need to really focus on what our strengths are and what our allies and partners are desperately asking from us. So we need to listen to them and provide those resources to them.
I'm afraid you're out of time, Mr. Hobach.
5 minutes is just never enough, or 6 minutes never.
We next go to Mr. Zuberi. You have 6 minutes.
Merci à tous les témoins d'être ici.
Thank you for all witnesses to be here. I will start with Mr. Tiberge. Thank you for your statement. I find it very interesting to think that Acadians must have a stronger presence in our diplomacy. That is a good idea for us, I believe. Canada is an officially bilingual country. We have officials who speak both English and French. How does our official bilingualism and bilingualism of our diplomats help with our various engagements and commitments around the world? Well, first of all, let me remind you that the new law on official languages, we mentioned for the first time, as far as I know, the Department of Foreign Affairs to promote French and English abroad. So the fact that Canada is bilingual is a Canadian opportunity, and we must present that internationally, therefore. I would also allow myself to quote a report from 2004 from the Commissioner of Official Languages. I mentioned it in my opening statement. There are 3 quotes from 2004, and it was a study on the disappearing on the PDO, the diplomacy program. And I think that will answer your question. 3 quotes. First of all, within the MIIC, the PDO is largely considered to be a source of capital funding for projects and related to linguistic duality. Secondly, the functioning of the program is focused on partnerships. The PDO is a complement to various federal programs that don't have the same vision on linguistic duality. This brings forward the question of integration of this duality in federal programs. The third quote is that Canada should have an international policy that makes adequate space to linguistic duality in the elaboration of our programs. Therefore, in my opinion, we often talk about linguistic duality in Canada, but we speak very little of it outside of Canada. We need to make space to civil society organizations to play a role in that space and to create partnerships, just like we do at the SNA, in order to support the actions of the government. Thank you very much. And with the increase of French in the world, especially in Africa, how does French help us engage in French in diplomacy in terms of trade? What kind of impact does it have in terms of our engagements in the continent? Answer, in many of our actions, we are often confronted with the fact that foreigners believe that French in Canada is Quebec. They are often surprised to find out that French in Canada is not just in Quebec. I live in Halifax, Madame Mallet is in Moncton, and this is a lack on the international scene. There's also Atlantic Canada. Quebec is also part of Acadia. We're quickly realizing that French is not just in Quebec. And the more we speak about it, the more there is interest and the more we are opening the door to these exchanges and collaborations and trade, education, promotions with young people and so on and so forth. Question. So in Africa, specifically, do you have any ideas on how we can better engage with this continent, Africa? Well, there are explorations that are being done. There's much work done at the recruitment of international students, for example. African students come within our organizations, whether it be universities of Moncton or St. Anne. The SNA manages the Atlantic Committee and we promote the Atlantic Canada as a place where you can live both in English and French. And there's also much to be done in terms of student mobility. So much is already being done, and more can be done if we were better supported to do so. Thank you for this answer.
That remains. You said that in your opening remarks, you said that Canada should be engaged with multilateral organizations. Not that we aren't already, but you were indicating that we should consider other engagements or thickening other engagements. Do you want to elaborate further on that in the next 60 seconds?
Sure. Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Engaging in multilateral organizations just for the sake of engaging in them is not necessarily in our interest. What the trend suggests in the past 10 to 15 years is increasing number of minilateral arrangements, be it AUKUS, be it various trilateral forums that are emerging as the center of gravity when it comes to international diplomacy. And Canada needs to focus on in what part of minilateral settings, for example, our own Quad that we mentioned, right, in South Korea, Japan, Canada, and the United States, when it comes to Northeast Asia. We need to focus on where we need to engage, whether it is better served in a traditional multilateral organization such as the UN, or our interests are better served in smaller groupings of like-minded states. And we need to take a good stock of that.
Thank you, MP Zuberi. Monsieur Bergeron, vous avez 6 minutes.
Mr. Bergeron, you have 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for our witnesses for being here to inform our thinking on the modernization of Canadian diplomacy. I am of those who think, Mr. Chair, that the government will invest further resources in order to support parliamentary diplomacy, civil diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, because these various forms of diplomacy are supporting traditional diplomacy, and that on the contrary, an insecure government would have the tendency to see all these forms of diplomacy, such as civil diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, as possible threats and cut the resources that would be attributed to those forms of diplomacy. I was listening to you speak, and I was impressed by everything that you were able to accomplish without the financial contribution to the PDP. From this, should I understand that you would be able to do much more if such financial means would be allocated to support Canadian diplomacy overall? What are the spin-offs for Canada in terms of investing in civil diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, and so on? Thank you for this question. On spin-offs, I can speak a little bit of the trends in the last few years and what we could be doing if there were more means. The question when it comes to Acadia, does civil diplomacy, these spin-offs are shared for the whole of the Atlantic provinces. If it wasn't for Acadia's work and at the SNA on the international scene, the scope of these international actions would be limited to relationships with New England. So now we're opening for the whole of the region, relationships with abroad with other countries that we would not have a relationship with otherwise. Let me give you an example. Last 2 years, we were invited by President Macron to the Élysée, a Acadian delegation, and we invited the minister from Nova Scotia, and it was a new minister that was just elected, who was just elected. That was during COVID. Borders were closed, movement was limited, and there was an accompanying delegation. And then he comes back the next week and tells his colleagues at cabinet what he experienced. And President Macron came to Nova Scotia by invitation of the delegation. So all of a sudden, this young minister opened the door to his government with France, something that was not imaginable before. So since that visit, the Premier of Nova Scotia came back to France twice in order to continue to build relationships. New Brunswick's Premier also did the same. So these spin-offs was one of the examples. Another one is the strategy of the Acadian artists on the international scene. We were able to show that for every dollar invested by APECA, there are $5 of spin-offs for revenue for Acadian artists since the creation. We're talking about $200 million of revenues for Acadian artists coming from abroad. That is quite a significant amount. There was $78 million at the summit of the Francophonie. There was an increase of 77% increase in Francophone immigration in the region in 2011, 37% since 2011. These are important impacts relative as for international students' economic impact. There was an important change in the recruitment of international students. In New Brunswick, there is $310 million in economic impact coming from international students in New Brunswick. There are also, we have signed an agreement that would be able to give grants for Acadian students to study in France. And since the 70s, we've created grants that are Acadia France. So it's about $500,000 that allowed about over 50 French students to come to Canada. And that is why we are a leader. We created an Acadian leadership. So there are important spin-offs, important impacts that are realized, but we're doing that with very little means. So we can only imagine the magnitude of the impact should we have any means. And there are also, you referred to the Commissioner of Official Languages. There are none of the recommendations were implemented since then. None. That was our brief in 2022. This is the point of our presentation today. Everything that Madame Mallet explained, it's like a Club Med ad. Imagine if we had the means. We also had a visit to Élysée. President Macron made 4 promises. I mentioned one, namely his visit to the International Congress next year. There's also another event in Saint-Jean, Nouveau-Brunswick. The president of Acadia at the City of the French language. So there are promises that were done. We made many engagements, but there are very little means. Imagine if we did have the means. Do I still have some time left?
To Madam McPherson, you have 6 minutes.
I'm Heather. Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's early. It's Monday. Thank you all very much for being here today. And I want to thank you for bringing up the fact that there is a lot of French speakers outside of Quebec. As somebody who represents the French Quarter in Alberta, about 20% of my writing is French. It's an important thing to note. But my questions today are actually for you, Mr. Devlin, if I could. You spoke in an article in 2021 about the need to align our foreign policy with public opinion. And I've struggled with this for a very long time. I've thought about this in terms of our international development efforts. And one of the things that I wonder about is, first of all, in recent years, over the last sort of 15 years, there's been massive cuts to public engagement, massive cuts to public education with regards to public opinion around global citizenship. So the implications of that are, we're no longer talking about it in schools, in media, in universities, the same way that we used to do, and yet, on the other hand, saying that we then should align with public opinion when we have not, invested in making sure that Canadians are engaged in public opinion. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the implications of that, and then perhaps, if this is the case, if we have a population whose public opinion is not being informed by some of these initiatives, should we be trying to align with that public opinion? I'd love your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much. And I think it's a very, very important question, particularly given the fact that in a democracy, we need to be able to have the citizens support when it comes to pursuing our national interests. And that requires a well-informed citizenry about the importance of why and where Canada engages in the world, why we pursue particular foreign policies, and how that actually advances the interests of everyday people. That requires, as you pointed out, a sustained effort, in particularly in a country as fortunate as Canada, that does not have to deal with the threats like many other countries in the world. We are surrounded by 3 oceans and a very friendly superpower, and we have been, in the past 150 years, have been part of the group that actually shape the international order. So our citizens are comfortable in ignoring the international politics. Now, the fact that it is changing today, that we no longer have the luxury to assume that bad things happen to other people in faraway places, should be a wake-up call for not only for the government, but for the civil society and for media and others, to engage regularly with the everyday Canadians, explain to them, inform them, and it has to be a feedback mechanism. It has to be a back and forth. Address their concerns and how pursuing our foreign policy interests are also about increasing their security and prosperity, and that requires investments. If we don't do that, we would lose the democratic legitimacy of pursuing what we are doing.
Well, and also I would say, too, that our foreign policy right now picks and chooses when we need to align with public opinion. So, for example, you'll often hear the government say that they don't support increases to development assistance because there isn't public support for that. Yet we see, for example, with the call for a ceasefire in Gaza and against Israel and Hamas, that 71%, Main Street polling says 71% of Canadians do support a ceasefire, and the government chooses not to do that. So we pick and choose when we want to use public opinion as a legitimizing force for our foreign policy, I guess, which is obviously a very big problem. We're also talking today about diplomacy, though, and Canada's diplomatic role. And I would say, too, that what we have here is a focus on trade, which I think is important. But from my perspective, trade is the reward you get when you do the hard work of diplomacy and development and all of these other foreign policy issues, which I don't think we've done. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and perhaps about how, some of the things that we see Canadian companies doing abroad that are quite detrimental to our reputation, how that might harm our actual bigger goals of our bigger foreign policy goals.
Let me just address the first point about the democratic alignment as well, and then talk about how we can actually engage in diplomacy in advancing our interests. On the aligning component, it is also important to note that leadership does matter. No one is really expecting the public to lead in these particular issues. It is the job of the elected representatives in a representative democracy to be able to lead in this and engage. It is the job of the government and the elected representatives to make the case to the public that why pursuing certain policies are in the national interest. So it is not about blindly following what the public and the public mood does. And foreign policy in no country is a public sport in a way. It is always government elite led, but it is important that it is aligned with the broader interests of the public, and that requires constant interaction with the people, rather than assuming and picking and choosing on places that we believe that it is aligned. On the diplomacy front, I agree that we need to do the legwork, but that also requires a focused attention on what our strengths are, what we can bring to the table, and we should avoid basically lecturing to other countries without offering something substantial in either improving their security, increasing their well-being, or increasing their prosperity. Just talking to the people will not necessarily get us there. But we also need to listen to other countries, our allies and partners, not necessarily go there with our own perceptions of what is good for other countries, but need to listen their needs, what they are hoping to get out from Canada and engagement with Canada, and whether those desires, aspirations aligned with our interests. That's where I think the diplomacy component is key. And I would add one more point.
I think you maybe don't get to add. Sorry.
Considerably over time.
Time goes fast.
So we will now go to the second round, and we start off with Mr. Abul Taif. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Abul Taif.
Thank you. Mr. Devlin, you've said that geography is our best friend. Could it be also our worst enemy?
In terms of thinking carefully about foreign policy and the need to put resources into it, it could be a curse as well.
How can we leverage that good geography that we have? Are we doing so? Are we able to do so? And if you can give some examples, would be great.
I think we could leverage our safe and secure position in a much more effective way in the world. Our geography, like I said, blessed us with presence in two of the largest oceans, Atlantic and the Pacific, as well as the Arctic, where it's increasingly becoming important in international politics. And we are fortunate enough to have a neighbor that we have a very long and friendly relationship. That means that apart from maintaining those two key areas that I mentioned, good relations with the United States and a stable open international order that our prosperity depends on, everything else is, in a way, a luxury for Canada to engage in. We are in a place where we put resources, as a rich country, put resources in addressing questions that we can leverage our resources and geography and position to help the world's problems, because we only have to deal with two basic things rather than 20 different things like many countries.
We put in as much resources as we can. Norway's put more on development than we do. They have almost not even 50 out of the population of Canada. But the role of Canada on the international stage is also a part of the policy that within our allies. And do you believe that we lost any independency on our position on international issues compared to the last 2 decades?
I would say not so much the loss of independence, but increasing irrelevance, in the sense that unless we address the needs and concerns of our allies and bring the capabilities and resources to the table, we're not going to be asked our opinion. Our influence will decrease, and we will not necessarily be on the top of the mind when allies come together to address common challenges. So it's not so much the loss of independence, but the loss of influence, I would say.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abul Taif. We now go to MP Longfeld. Welcome to our committee. You have the floor, and you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And I'm going to spend my time with Mr. Devlin. The title of Director of Transatlantic Programs stood out to me. I've been a member of a discussion group between Germany, Canada, and the United States on climate change and the opportunities that climate change brings from a clean technology point of view. I was president of the Chamber of Commerce in Guelph. Our mayor was involved with this dialogue with Berlin and with the United States. We met at our consulate office, or at our embassy in Berlin, and to add to Mr. Bergeron's list, there's also environmental diplomacy and some opportunities where our embassy brought together some businesses and some municipalities to look at how we're reacting to the opportunities that climate change brings. We were actually able to attract a business from Denmark to locate in Guelph because of our diplomatic efforts that we had at our embassy. Could you comment on the strength? COP28 has just wound up. There's a lot of opportunities coming out globally. Canada is in a leading role in terms of clean technology. Could you talk about how our diplomatic service needs to be able to respond to these new opportunities that climate change brings Canada?
Thank you very much. And I think that's a very important point. I was, together with some other colleagues, in Berlin in October. We had a chance to talk with some stakeholders there and have the opportunity to engage with our embassy as well. And one of the key topics was how Canada can contribute to European energy security, including clean energy and technology. What is very clear to me from the European allies and friends, as well as in the Pacific allies and friends, is that there is a demand for Canada and Canadian energy and Canadian clean tech to be part of it. And here I include the nuclear part too, which is an increasingly important part of the energy mix as being recognized by the world, by our European allies and by others, that we need to be able to provide. We have the technology, we have the resources in Northern Saskatchewan, for example. Same goes with other technologies as well.
But on clean tech, and we've got very limited time.
Sure.
When I look at Germany and what they've done on district energy, we are at the very early stages. They've pretty much tapped out some parts of their market, looking for international opportunities. If we took district energy as a theme, would that be something we could develop?
I'm not necessarily an expert on that particular technology, so I won't be able to comment on that. Well, what I can say is that one of the things that is amazing that our German allies did is to move very fast when they need to adapt. That includes setting up an offshore LNG terminals in 18 months. Doing something like that here in Canada takes years. So I think we need to be much more agile in getting those resources out as our allies show that it can be done.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have a minute and a half.
Minute and a half?
Yes.
I want to specify for my colleague Longfield that civil diplomacy can include environmental groups as well. I understand the Government of Canada decided to retain $3 million for the OIF funding in order to organize internally. Do you know how this sum was spent? Do you know if these cuts has sustained character? Thank you for this question. That's a great question. $3 million were taken off from Canada's contribution to the OIF for reasons that belong to the government. What we know is that from this sum, there is a small portion, very small, that was transferred, about $100,000. So $2.9 million remain that was not attributed yet, that this is money from Canada for diplomacy. I will repeat what I said earlier. Imagine if we had access to more funding to do the work that we do in diplomacy. This sum could be transferred to the real principle of by and for the communities in Canada, and that sums that we can be used. Is this sustained funding? We don't know. We hope that this sum that to be attributed in the future, it could be coming back to the OIF, including organizations of civil society such as Société Civile de l'Acadie, SNA, to recognize the impact that we have on Canadian diplomacy with the actions that we take. Thank you.
We next go to MP McPherson. You have a minute and a half.
Minute and a half. Mr. Devlin, very quickly, when I asked you questions earlier, you were talking a little bit about coming to the table with something concrete, and we know that developing our relationships with emerging economies is key. Could you, in the very short time we have, talk a little bit about those steps that Canada should be taking to develop those relationships with emerging economies and the role that those three pillars of the diplomacy, the trade and development, play?
Thank you very much. I think we need to be paying attention to where we can leverage our resources, like I pointed out, where we can leverage our strengths, and engaging with the emerging economies that will be hungry for energy and minerals and other resources is an important step. But that needs to go beyond just the government engagement. We need to be able to talk to both private sector, civil society organizations, as well as the governments in those countries. And we need to be able to leverage our own capabilities, both including civil society organizations and our multicultural ability to engage in Quebec and its experience could actually help quite a lot with the federal government when it comes to engaging in French Africa, for example. Right? It is going to be the most populous continent in the world, and our engagement with Africa is very limited, despite the fact that we are both a member of Commonwealth and the Francophonie. It is a resource that we need to engage a lot more, and we need to do it in a multi-formatted way, not only by government to government, but also including private sector and civil society.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. We next go to Mr. Chong. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Devlin, thank you for appearing. You recently wrote co-wrote an article indicating that the UN has shown itself to be irrelevant on things that matter, and that in our current era, multilateralism has been overtaken by minilateral agreements between like-minded states, minilateral arrangements between like-minded states, arrangements such as the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue and AUKUS. Global Affairs Canada's Future of Diplomacy discussion paper recommends strengthening Canada's presence at the UN. Do you agree with that recommendation, and why? Or why not?
I think Canada's resources can be better put to use in specific unilateral arrangements rather than doubling down on the UN system. The UN, as we have witnessed in the past 10 to 15 years, is increasingly deadlocked, is increasingly irrelevant in terms of solving the global problems that we have. It doesn't mean that completely withdrawing or not providing resources to the United Nations, but it is about identifying where we can actually make a difference, and whether our services, our strengths are served better, our interests are served better in a unilateral setting, instead of getting bogged down in the UN.
You also recommended that Canada focus its efforts internationally by withdrawing membership in certain global institutions such as the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. Would you also extend that to the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank?
Absolutely, and we actually make the case in the piece that we should not be part of China's International Development Bank that is used for
and
communist
why
parties.
do you think we should withdraw from the ERBD?
The primary function of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development is to engage in development aid that is right now mostly become either advanced level of developing countries. Our resources can very well be pointed out to other places, such as Africa, for example, and engage in the infrastructure, both digital and physical infrastructure development there, rather than continue to fund what was initially formulated for a post-war European reconstruction organization.
Thank you. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
MP Chong. We now go for the final question to MP Oliphant.
Merci pour tout le monde. Merci.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Theberge and Mrs. Mallet. It was really interesting for me to hear the contribution to civil society, but I also agree with Mr. Bergeron. The other tracks, the second track, civil society, parliamentarians, and as well as cultural diplomacy. Is there only grants? Is there a structure? Do you recommend any structure for international affairs? I will mention two things. The study was on Canada's diplomatic capacity. You mentioned it. Civil diplomacy, cultural diplomacy needs to be further supported to support governmental diplomacy. We have an organization to promote Acadian artists, which promotes the artist and his work internationally. This is a great example of a lever that we can use internationally. I would also mention our agreement between Acadia and France that we just renewed in October. This agreement has 3 categories: the promotion of Acadian and French culture, as well as French as a language, socioeconomic elements, and promotions for the youth. For this agreement, we are aiming to develop a 10-year action plan on which we can generate measurable actions that we can monitor and evaluate in the future and determine its impacts. Imagine if the government of Canada accepted to develop a strategy with respect to diplomacy, which includes civil diplomacy, cultural diplomacy, open diplomacy, and that would allow us to give us a means to develop such an action plan in a robust way and a strategic plan that would accompany the actions of the government of Canada. Everybody would be a winner, not just Acadia, but everybody. Question, is there also a role for your association or others for the protection of minority languages, not just French language, but also not just French language and the culture of Acadia, but also minority languages in the world? This is a great question. Your colleague spoke of the duality in Canada and how do we promote internationally. Well, this is exactly one of the strengths of Canada has internationally, this capacity to maintain this linguistic duality. Acadia is an excellent example of how we can show this capacity of a civil society that succeeded against all odds to exist and to reach constantly higher grounds. We have this example of the way we organize civil society, and with peace as well. We have very positive examples to share internationally. Thank you very much.
At this point, on behalf of the entire committee, I'd like to thank all three of our witnesses, Mr. Devlin, Mr. Tiberge, and Madame Mallet. Very, very grateful for your time and for your perspective as well. So I will suspend for very, very briefly for a couple of minutes. I see our next panel of witnesses are actually in the room, so it shouldn't take more than 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. I'd now like to welcome our second panel of witnesses. We're grateful to have with us today Mr. Charles Burton, a senior fellow at the Macdonald Laurier Institute. We have Mr. Artie Imsees, the assistant professor at the Faculty of Law at Queen's University. Welcome, Mr. Imsees. And lastly, from the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, we're very, very fortunate to have with us today Mr. Colin Robertson. So as you are aware, given that you have been here for the past hour, you will each be provided 5 minutes for your opening remarks, after which we will open it to questions from the members. We'll start off with Mr. Burton. Mr. Burton, you have 5 minutes for your opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. China's relations with the West, particularly China's strategies of hybrid warfare and the Chinese Communist Party's influence operations in Western nations, is my area of expertise. I was educated in China, subsequently worked at the Communications Security Establishment, and have had 2 diplomatic postings to Canada's embassy in Beijing earlier on in my career. What Canada is facing today is an increasingly corrosive challenge from China's Communist Party, state, military, civilian, market People's Republic of China regime complex. China's strategic intent in Canada is severely at odds with our interests and values. But Global Affairs Canada's response to China's comprehensive and coordinated malign challenge to our democratic institutions has been, to be frank about it, pathetically weak and highly ineffective. Indeed, the Senate's Rising to the Challenge, Empowering Canada's Foreign Service report that just came out says, and I quote, "Foreign language capacity at Global Affairs Canada has diminished in recent decades, with an insufficient number of staff who can speak Mandarin, Russian, and Arabic." Then, if you look at Global Affairs' June 2023 Future of Diplomacy, Transforming Global Affairs Canada discussion paper, says along similar lines, and I quote, "Foreign service officers with in-depth expertise in specific geographies and issue areas have increasingly felt disadvantaged over time, including in promotional processes where emphasis has been placed on management competencies rather than geographic, linguistic, or issue area expertise." And in response, the report says, the department is coordinating an investment of $35 million over 5 years to build China-focused analytical capacity across its global mission network. Well, in my view, this is much too little, much too late. And anyway, this is belied by the report in the National Post last week that last August, as a cost-cutting measure, Global Affairs suspended all foreign language programs offered at missions until March 31st, 2024. Furthermore, GAC's adopting a country-agnostic diplomatic approach to China does not take into account that our Canadian institutions are not compatible and have no genuine counterparts with those of China's Leninist system. What I mean to say is the Chinese ambassador in Ottawa's most important role is that he is head of the Embassy Chinese Communist Party Committee. The ambassador oversees a massive network outside of legitimate embassy and consulate premises, including the police stations and proxy organizations that enable interference in our elections and other democratic processes, and which direct Chinese businesses in Canada to engage in a wide range of gray zone and espionage activities to transfer sensitive technologies to the Beijing regime. The resultant paucity of in-depth China-specific expertise within Global Affairs Canada means our diplomats are readily flim-flammed by sophisticated Chinese regime interlocutors and Canadian special interests who are beholden to the Chinese regime interests. Another issue that I feel I should raise is the tendency of foreign service officers retiring from the public service to undertake roles effectively enabling the PRC agenda in Canada. What I mean is they go into lucrative positions in agencies such as the Asia-Pacific Foundation or Canada-China Business Council, or law firms and other enterprises with close relationships with business networks of the Chinese regime. Such post-government sinecures are not available to civil servants who, while in positions of public trust, were identified by the Chinese embassy as having been proactive in seeking to defend Canada's security against the malign activities of the Chinese regime. We are more and more aware that the Chinese authorities maintain a lot of lists and files on us all, facilitated by AI. This reality has a dampening effect on the rigor with which GAC seeks to defend Canada's security and sovereignty against China's very serious challenge to us. We talk a lot about China, but we do little. The upshot is, sadly, thanks to our Canadian naivety, greed, and passivity, that time and time again, China comes up on top to the damage of Canadian national interests of security and sovereignty. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burton. We next go to Professor Imses. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In brief, I have 3 simple points. First, Canada's declared commitment to the rules-based international legal order is crucial to maintaining its moral standing in the world. Upholding international law is the only normative yardstick on the international plane is essential if Canada's future diplomacy initiative is to succeed. Second, for Canada's declared commitment to international law to result in concrete diplomatic and reputational gains on the international plane, it must both be and be seen to be credible by others. Credibility is everything, and in a world where geopolitical tumult is on the rise, it is in Canada's national interest to cultivate and protect its credibility. Third, by all objective accounts, unfortunately, Canada has failed to maintain its credibility when it comes to upholding international law in practice. This is evidenced by very clear double standards applied by Canada, which derive from an apparent prioritization of political preferences and alliances over universal application of norms and the rule of law. And to illustrate, let us consider Canada's position on 2 of the most high-profile conflicts raging today, occupied Ukraine and occupied Palestine. In Ukraine, Canada has appropriately and consistently affirmed its opposition to Russia's aggression, annexation, and occupation. Canada's position is rooted in 2 key principles of international law. First, the prohibition on territorial conquest. Second, the obligation to respect the right of peoples to self-determination. Because these norms are peremptory in nature, derogation from them is not permitted at international law. As such, all states, including Canada, have an obligation not to recognize their violation nor do anything to aid or assist them. In Palestine, while Canada's official position remains that Israel is an occupying power there and that Israeli settlements are unlawful, the government has pursued a policy that aids and assists in the maintenance of this violation. It does this by allowing for the duty-free import of Israeli settlement products under the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement. Under SIFTA, Israeli territory is defined in a manner that includes the occupied Palestinian territory, thereby violating the prohibition on territorial conquest and the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination. The Attorney General of Canada now takes the position that it is reasonable to label Israeli settlement products as, quote, products of Israel when they are imported into Canada, even though these products are actually produced in occupied Palestine. On its face, SIFTA is an unlawful treaty under international law for being in violation of the 2 peremptory norms that I've earlier noted. In addition, the terms of SIFTA do not comport with Canada's obligations under Security Council Resolution 2334 to, quote, distinguish in its relevant dealings between the territory of the State of Israel and the territories occupied since 1967. Canada is also clearly in breach of its obligation to respect and to ensure respect the terms of the 4th Geneva Convention, as well as the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court. In this respect, which identifies settlements as a war crime, these conventions have been incorporated into the domestic legislation of Canada, as you all know. And given the unprecedented situation now in Palestine, I must raise 2 further points about Canada's position that do clear harm to its reputation globally. First, is Canada's position that despite the crisis of impunity that prevails in the Middle East, Palestine should not be allowed to seek redress in the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. These mechanisms are central in upholding the rules-based international legal order, given they encourage states to resolve disputes pacifically rather than through the use of force. If anything is apparent from the current events, we need more, not less law, forgive me. We need more pacific dispute resolution, not less of it. Why then would Canada actively take measures to oppose Palestine's recourse to justice through these mechanisms? Relatedly, it is inexplicable that some 2 months into the most recent hostilities, which have resulted in the killing of over 18,000 Palestinians, 2/3 of whom are women and children, 1,200 Israelis, and the injury of 50,000 Palestinians and 5,000 Israelis, why Canada refuses to join the majority of states in calling for a general ceasefire. With every day that passes, hundreds more are killed and millions remain subjected to starvation as a tool of war. Gaza is being razed through the wholesale, indiscriminate Israeli bombardment and the specter of permanent forcible transfer of all of the 2.3 million Gazans out of Gaza looms large. Surely, if peace is to prevail, an immediate cessation of hostilities is the least that Canada could and should be calling for. Thank you for your time. I'm happy to take questions in Q&A. I'll conclude there. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Imses. We now go to Mr. Robertson. Mr. Robertson, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. My observations on diplomatic capacity are based on 33 years in Canada's Foreign Service and 15 years with the Canadian Global Affairs Institute. We need diplomatic capacity to advance our objectives internationally. This is hard in a world that is messier, meaner, and multi-centered. It is even harder when the political divide of our times is open versus closed, with no consensus on shared norms or rules, especially when it comes to human rights. It is further complicated with social media spewing disinformation and misinformation aimed at destabilizing and dividing democracies. Diplomatic capacity relies on both hard and soft power. This means a robust foreign service to serve individual Canadians and Canadian interests. This also means a muscular armed forces to ensure deterrence and collective security, as well as well-funded development assistance to deal with global inequities and support fellow democracies. We are no longer the helpful fixer we once were. We can play that role, but to do so, we must strengthen our diplomatic capacity. As a first step, I encourage you to endorse and fund the recommendations in the recent Senate report, More Than a Vocation, Canada's Need for a 21st Century Foreign Service. My second observation, the United States will always be our preponderant relationship, our partner in trade, our ally in defense and security, our core steward in managing our shared environment. You can't change geography, nor would we want to. We think we know all about the United States. We don't. I encourage parliamentarians to travel to the U.S. and cultivate members of Congress, whether through local, regional, or policy interests. These relationships pay big dividends, especially as the U.S. tires of overseas entanglements and becomes more insular, if not isolationist. As to managing Uncle Sam, remember 3 things. First, our influence abroad hinges on our perceived access in Washington and understanding of Americans. For its part, the United States is always interested in our intelligence and constructive ideas that we can bring to the table. Again, this requires an active and agile global diplomacy, including being in places the United States is not, such as Pyongyang, Tehran, and Havana. Second, as Brian Mulroney put it, we can disagree without being disagreeable. Americans can take criticisms. What they cannot stand is dithering or obfuscation. Finally, avoid preachiness. Heed Lester Pearson's advice that, quote, as American difficulties increase, we should resist any temptation to become smug and superior. Our own experience, as we wrestle with our own problems, gives us no ground for any such conviction. And my third observation, we balance our bilateral U.S. relationship with an active multilateralism aimed at creating norms and rules. We need to re-embrace functionalism, meaning that if you have interests and competence, you earn and deserve a seat at the table. Functionalism is how small and medium powers level the playing field against big powers, who would return us to a system based on spheres of influence where big dictates to small. In conclusion, more than most nations, Canadian sense of self-identity is realized by how we act and are seen to act abroad. More than most, Canada's prosperity depends on our ability to trade and invest abroad and to attract talented newcomers. This means strengthening our diplomatic capacity with a similar commitment to strengthening our armed forces and diplomatic assistance. Thank you, Chair.
Very much, Mr. Robertson. So now we open it up to questions from the members, and we first go to Mr. Epp. You have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses, and particularly technology is wonderful, in person is far better. So let me begin with you, Mr. Burton. You have been critical of Canada's depletion of our hard power. Many call for Canada's role in the world to contain soft power. Can we have a soft power without hard power?
No.
Mr. Collin, Mr. Robertson?
No. Years ago, Jeff Pearson, Lester Pearson's son, Jeff Pearson, was a Canadian diplomat who became our ambassador at the UN and in Moscow. We were having lunch and we were talking about all the things we were doing. But one of the, Pearson turned to me and said, you know, what the current government of the time had forgotten was that you can't do soft power without hard power, and that was something his father fundamentally understood in the post-war period, that we were so successful in that post-war period, the so-called golden era, in large part because we had that hard power to back up that soft power, which was something that Pearson and diplomats of that era understood. And I think both governments of that era also understood it.
Thank you. Back to Mr. Burton. Canada was not included in the 2021 Three Eyes Agreement to counter Chinese influence. Why?
Yes, I was in Washington 3 weeks ago, and we talked about this. I mean, frankly, you know, particularly under our current Prime Minister, I think that there's a feeling that Canada is not deserving to be part of these important multilateral, you know, minilateral institutions. We just don't bring enough to the plate. Our Prime Minister's statement that we would never meet the 2%, you know, went down like a stone into a still pond. A lot of rhetoric, just not enough coming forward with what needs to be there to be considered a responsible stakeholder in these institutions. Not to speak of issues of leakiness in terms of our maintaining confidential documents that are shared between the Five Eyes.
Thank you. You mentioned Canada doesn't bring enough to the plate. Witness in the first round, Mr. Balkin-Devlin, priorities, or basically testified that Canada's priorities for our foreign service should be around our trading, obviously our U.S. relationship, and our trading relationships, and what Canada brings to the table. Do you agree with that statement from a prioritization perspective, with Mr. Burton to start?
I think certainly, you know, we shouldn't work at odds to the United States. I think there's no question that they are our main partner, and we need to continue to rely on the U.S. I don't agree that we should be entirely oriented towards trade. I think we have to pay much more attention to the security threat from Russia and China, particularly in our north, but, you know, the security threat that seeks to undermine us everywhere. I mean, when I learned that the Chinese were trying to go after Mr. Chong's family to pressure Mr. Chong, I thought there's a serious problem here that we should be addressing much, much, much more rigorously.
Thank you. Mr. Robertson, you testified at the Senate study on a similar basis. Where should, given that study, given those 29 recommendations, what are we doing here? What could we add to around this table, specific that the Senate didn't cover?
Well, I think that's a pretty comprehensive report. So I would encourage you to look at the recommendations, pick out the ones you think are the most salient, and support them. It all comes down to money in the end. And in some cases, probably a redeployment of resources. I think one of the comments made in the Senate report is that the foreign affairs is top-heavy and it's too home-based and not enough foreign, as they put it. And I certainly concur with that. So I think support that. I believe that the minister and the deputy minister would like to go down that way, but I do think encouragement from this committee would help. And so I do think we need more people and more foreign service, less bean counters, because that's ultimately what we need. And there are situations, we talk about Gaza, we talk about Ukraine, we just simply don't have the capacity to meet this anymore. Our armed forces are a similar position, but our foreign service in particular, remember, the foreign service is roughly the same size as it was when I joined almost 50 years ago. And yet Canada is, a third bigger. And if we want to play, we have to pay for these things. And again, I underline that it's all part of a whole.
If I can, I want to get in one more question to you. It's along the same vein. This is exactly where I wanted to go. But given resource constraints, where would you prioritize? I mean, you were critical of the cutting of the language studies in favor, instead of chopping the top-heavy part. Where would you prioritize, and where could we do less of?
Well, language is really important. I think we've made the case, and that's what you have to be able to understand and empathize with the cultures, and cutting back language is completely short-sighted. And especially in a country like our own, where we have people we can probably do. But this means a whole new look at how we do, bluntly, the human resources within foreign affairs. And probably a reallocation of where we put the resources. Again, less home-based, more foreign. That's what you want a foreign service for. I spent half my career abroad. People today spend maybe 10% of their career abroad. That's not very effective foreign service.
Thank you. We next go to MP El Gabra. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I regret not being there with all of you, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to ask our witnesses questions. We often talk about foreign policy being shaped by promoting our values and defending our interests. There's also another factor that is understood but rarely spoken about publicly, which is politics. In a democracy, there is role for citizens, civil society to participate in shaping our policies, but it's not in. So I guess my question is, if we are, as a committee, to offer recommendation to government on how to promote participation of civil society, of citizens in shaping policy, yet protect against the cynical perspective that policies could be bought and sold, what would you offer to us as a committee that we could study or recommend to the government? Maybe I'll start with Professor Emsis.
Thanks for the question, Mr. Al-Ghabra. I think doing exactly what you're doing here. Meet with people who are in the know, collect information, make sure that there are value bases as well that the government operates under. We are told, for instance, that we share values with various countries in the world with whom we share tight, strong relations, and yet those countries are engaged in violations of the most basic principles of international law that we claim also to have fidelity towards. So clearly our values aren't worth that much when we consider other competing factors. So it's important for our civil service to work, regardless of who's in power, towards ensuring that values are kept tight, strong, in line with the broader, more progressive middle power politics that is what Canada's footprint should be on the international plane. Thank you.
Mr. Robertson?
Well, I think one of the things this committee, I know, has been debating is, do you do a foreign policy review? What I'd like to see is what we did in the 90s when we had a joint parliamentary committee, Senate and from the House, and they toured the country looking at our broad foreign relationships. This included defense and development as well, because I think that parliamentarians are the best place to listen to Canadians. That's, you represent Canadians, and crossing the country, you'll get that wide perspective of views, and then they came out with a report within about 6 months. That's much more effective than throwing it to global affairs, where it's doing these things as like a visit from the Dementors. It takes years and years before we get anything out. Look at our Indo-Pacific strategy, which took 5 or 6 years. We're still wrestling with an Arctic framework. So I would say, you as parliamentarians, if you say, let's do this, and you can do it in 6 months, I think that would make a lot of sense. And you would come out with the bare bones. Here's what Canadian interests are. Here's how our values support our interests, but here's really what we think, we as parliamentarians think you should focus on, because I find sometimes it's impossible within global affairs or some of the departments to actually be able to agree on anything where our priorities should be. That's the role of government, and I think there it takes us back to parliamentarians and your role to get out and listen and report and list those priorities.
One last question. Is the issue, and Professor Empsis, you referred to this, values, but we also talk about interest. What happens when there's a tension between values and interest? We know sometimes that happens, for example, with our biggest trading partner, the United States. So how do we resolve these tensions or these questions when they surface?
One example of where there was a negative for us in 10 years, we twice tried to get a seat on the Security Council of the United Nations and twice failed to much smaller, relatively speaking, countries. Ireland, I think Norway, perhaps, if my recollection serves. Both of whom have a much broader, larger footprint on the international plane, both of whom have much deeper ties to the global south, both of whom have basically their ears on the ground based on values of what the world community actually expects in the 21st century. We failed to meet the challenge, not once, but twice, and it was because we dropped the ball on our values and didn't adhere to them.
Do I have time? Or?
You have 10 seconds remaining.
Well, maybe Mr. Robertson can follow up on that.
I think your values inform your interests, and I think sometimes we make a false dichotomy between the two. And so I don't get it. I think it becomes a kind of a circular argument. Ultimately, your values should inform your interests.
Thank you. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have 5 minutes, sir.
5 minutes, 6?
5 minutes, yes, correct.
Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Robertson, you listened to the dialogue we had just now with the representatives from the SNA. In an article published in Policy in May 2022, you asked, and I quote, that the government, you wrote in that article that the government must fully implement the recommendations of the Senate called cultural diplomacy relative to foreign diplomacy in Canada. We need to create a comprehensive cultural diplomacy strategy with resources and something that can be measured. Also, can you tell us a bit more about that?
It was excellent. Throughout my career, cultural diplomacy, public diplomacy was a big piece of what we did, but it needs to be funded properly. And as we've heard again in this committee, the funding for these programs have been eviscerated, and they don't take place, and yet they are hugely valuable. I was posted in Los Angeles, and we made a major campaign to try and win the Oscar for one of our great films came out of Quebec, Denis Arcand's film, and we were successful working closely with the Quebec office there and with the Canadian performers, and this raised our profile, and because it allowed me to go in and talk about other things like the meat and potatoes, trade and investment, because if we're excellent in culture, then they kind of think, well, this country's actually got something, and this country does have superb culture, and therefore I do endorse that Senate report, and unfortunately it's fallen by the wayside, and I hope that doesn't happen to the other Senate report that has just come out.
You spoke of relationships with the delegation of Los Angeles, the delegation of Quebec. In the same article, you mentioned the fact that we need to further accentuate partnerships with provincial representatives, especially those of Quebec who have an external service that is very developed. Could you please elaborate on this recommendation? Sure. In my career, I spent much of my career overseas, and for every mission, there was a Quebec delegation, and we worked well together, in my experience. Delegations from Quebec can do things that I cannot do, but together, we represent a big strength, for example, for trade, the environment. We work well together every time. We work, frankly, better overseas than in Ottawa. at the end of the day, we have the same objectives. I would like to highlight one thing, and I've done it many times, that the complicity between Quebec's delegation and the other provinces, including the federal, is very important. Because at the end of the day, we want to open the doors to promote our common interests, our common values, and together we are stronger. What we can do with many representatives of the civil society, such as the SNA, as mentioned earlier, I would like to end with a question for Mr. Robertson. Once again, in the same article, you mentioned that we need to reduce partisan nominations. Do you have the feeling that this is a trend that will be increasing for foreign services, which will undermine the credibility of the service, but also the enthusiasm or the motivation of our troops internally? Answer, yes. I found that in my time in Parliament when I started, for me, we have worked together towards national interest. And with the passage of time, sometimes politics intervene, and that is normal, natural, because that is a fact of life. But I'd like to highlight for you and for this committee that it's better to work together. That's very important, that all parliamentarians may work together to advance the common project to improve our foreign service. The government must hear this message. Question.
Time, sir. Madam McPherson, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all three of you for your testimony today. It's been very enlightening. Mr. Amos, I'm going to ask you a few questions. You spoke about credibility being everything. You spoke about Canadian values and how our foreign policy needs to be grounded in those values. I wonder if you could speak to the case of Yemen and the Saudi-led coalition and Canada's approach to this conflict. Over the course of the war, Canada issued many statements condemning the Houthis, but neglected to ever name the Saudi coalition, despite many reports of bombings of schools, hospitals, and markets. And Canada has, of course, exported weapons to the coalition during this conflict. What are your concerns about that?
Sure. Thanks for that. As members of the committee know, I had the great pleasure of being named by the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights to the UN Commission of Inquiry on Yemen, served in that capacity for 2 years between 2019 and 2021, and had a front row seat to Canada's position. And I was very, very pleased to see, and this is to the credit of Canada's mission in Geneva in particular, the great support that was provided to our work at the Commission of Inquiry by the Canadians in Geneva as a matter of principle. They were there fighting for our mission, fighting for the renewal of our mandate, tooth and nail with other like-minded states. And that, to me, demonstrated that our foreign policy was moving in the right way, at least in terms of our values concerning accountability. On the other hand, and this is the counterintuitive bit to it, this was the same Canadian government that was supplying arms and that we at the Commission of Inquiry were reporting on an annual basis, supplying arms to the Saudi-led coalition. This was a matter of public record, and so we felt compelled to speak to it. Canada certainly isn't the largest arms supplier to the parties to the conflict in Yemen, that is to say to the Saudi-led coalition, but it is among the largest. And so there is an incongruity. On the one hand, Canada seeks accountability through the United Nations Commission of Inquiry, on which I served, and for good reason. On the other hand, it's focused on supplying arms to one of the parties to the conflict who we had found in our reports and in our investigations we had reasonable grounds to believe was indiscriminately bombarding the civilian population across the country. It's that, if you like, example that it's another example that highlights my concern with the incongruity between what Canada says it believes in on the one hand and what in fact it does on the other. And my heart goes out to, and great credit goes out to the people in our Geneva mission. It can't be easy to be a diplomat and explain this to the world when you're confronted by it. I know as an independent academic and member of the Commission of Inquiry and as a proud Canadian, there was no way I could not, in good conscience, do this work. Otherwise, the credibility of the work of the Commission of Inquiry would otherwise be called into account if I didn't speak to Canada's arms trade. Yeah. So this is a problem.
And for me, one of the big issues I think is that the rest of the world watches the way that Canada picks and chooses how we apply international law, how we apply, how we support the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, which is hugely problematic. As you mentioned, the Security Council seats that we've lost, that there are many emerging community or economies that the global south is looking at the decisions Canada makes and doesn't see us as a legitimate ethical actor anymore. We're losing that reputational benefit that I think Canada as a country has had. You spoke a lot about what's happening, the horrific atrocities that we're seeing in Gaza right now. I want you to speak a bit about the issue of recognition of the state of Palestine. Should we, as a committee, be pushing the Canadian government to recognize the state of Palestine? Would that help in moving the political and justice processes forward?
The short answer is yes. I have no doubt about that for the following reason. The Canadian government claims that it supports the two-state solution. One of those states is recognized by Canada and has long been since 1949. We actually had a role to play in the partition of Palestine. You all know the role of Justice Ivan Rand, who served on UNSCOP. At the same time, one other party that is under foreign military occupation now going on 56 years is a state, juridically at international law, recognized by 139 states, member states of the United Nations. And Canada is an outlier. There's no reason or rhyme why it wouldn't extend recognition to the territory of Palestine, being an occupied territory, for the following reason. Israel, as an occupying power, is not sovereign, cannot be sovereign in that territory. And so why ever would we not extend recognition to it in the hope that now you can engage two states with responsibilities and obligations on both states under international law and push them towards peace.
To a peaceful process. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We next go to Mr. Chong. Mr. Chong, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I read the Senate report last week, and one of the recommendations that really surprised me the most was Recommendation 8, that the Government of Canada should ensure that Global Affairs Canada's senior officials, including deputy ministers, have in-depth knowledge of and experience in international affairs. I was surprised that that recommendation even needed to be made in the Senate report. But I wanted to focus on what the purpose of this hearing is all about, and that's on the machinery of government and on how GAC manages our diplomacy. And so, first question, two of the recommendations concern reaffirming the central agency status of Global Affairs Canada and seeking separate agency status for Global Affairs Canada. I wonder if Mr. Burton and Mr. Robertson could comment on that.
Yes, I mean, I would certainly like to see Global Affairs Canada more removed from the politics of the day, and if these provisions would allow for that, I think it's a good idea. But, you know, ultimately what we need is more resources and more effective deployment of resources.
Do we need more resources, or do we need to reallocate resources? Because two of the recommendations in the Senate report concerned shifting resources around. One was to reduce the number of senior managers, ADMs and DMs and directors general in the department, reallocate those savings elsewhere, and secondly, to push down decision-making into mid-level bureaucrats and away from the bottlenecks that are currently in place because of the concentration of decision-making in senior management.
Definitely strongly support that in the sense that, you know, we have to make the most of what resources we have. And I've written a bit about this. I think we should be more focused on the North in a serious way, not in a rhetorical way. And, other areas will have to be set aside. We can't be everywhere all the time. And I absolutely agree with you in terms of reducing the numbers of higher-level bureaucrats. Everybody in foreign affairs wants to become a director general or an ambassador, and I think over years the increase in higher ranks has been responding to those career aspirations. It doesn't serve Canada's interest.
Mr. Robertson, could you comment on that?
Sure. I'll just say that, that report is excellent in large part because the driving force behind it, as you know, was the chair and the vice chair, both of whom were former deputies at Foreign Affairs, and they've put their sort of century of experience together into that report. That's why this report is so important, and you get a subtlety in the recommendations that only comes from that long experience of actually having sat in the chair and confronted all the problems.
Just a very quick question. The report recommends that gap
you're out of
replace
time,
the
Mr.
public
Chong.
service
I'm afraid you're out of time.
Can I just ask a very quick question?
I'm afraid you're out of time. It's well over 3 minutes.
I
You
thought
have
the
another
second-
round. You do have another round.
Okay,
So-
I'll take the next round. Thank you.
So, Mr. Oliphant, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, and thank you all for your contribution today. I do feel a little pushed into a defensive mode, and I try not to be, but to riff off of Mark Twain, the reports of our death, I think, are greatly exaggerated. And I want to mention a couple of things about that. Right now, with the Commonwealth, Canada's position and opinion is very much sought after on the situation in Guyana and a threat from Venezuela, and it is something that we are continually asked for leadership on. You may not know that, but Canada's position in many of our large organizations, La Francophonie, the Commonwealth, is still quite strong. I would also just suggest that when the leaders of the initiative from the Gulf and Arab Muslim states approached the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council and went to the presidency of the EU, Spain, they added Canada. And so of their mission around the world, they looked at the 5 large powers of the permanent members, as well as Canada and Spain as the president of the EU. I think that, just to be fair to people who are listening at home today, it would be incumbent upon us to recognize that Canada's leadership may not be as strong as it should be. We'll take these recommendations, but it is not finished yet. Mr. Chair, I'd like to take this opportunity, unfortunately, and I don't like doing this, but with the possibility of the House rising quickly, I would like to move a motion that I have on the order paper, on the notice, and that is the motion with respect to studying Africa. And it reads that pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, following the establishment of a dedicated mission and permanent observer to the African Union, recognizing Canada's shared interests and cooperation with countries on the African continent within multilateral organizations, including La Francophonie, the Commonwealth, and the United Nations, as well as strong people-to-people ties between Africans and Canadians, and with a view to continuing to strengthen Canada's effort to collaborate with African partners on shared priorities. A, the committee undertake a study on Canada's approach to Africa. B, that such a study examine, 1, Canada's diplomatic and geopolitical engagement with countries on the African continent, including how such engagement coordinates with Canada's international assistance program and Canada's work on Canada-Africa Economic Cooperation Strategy. Second, the political and security situation in the Sahel, including the impacts on Canadians and Canadian interests. And third, Canada's development and humanitarian assistance in sub-Saharan Africa. C, that it consists of a minimum of 6 meetings, that the committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the committee requests a comprehensive government response. And I do have copies of that available, and it was sent out, I believe, on Thursday. But I'd like to speak to it for a moment. Well, no.
Are you moving the motion?
I moved it.
Well, I don't want to speak now. We want to continue to interview the witnesses.
Yes, but under the standing orders,
Mr. Chair, I move we adjourn debate on the motion. I move we adjourn debate on the motion.
Non-debatable.
So we now go to Ms. What's that? So we now put that to a vote.
Mr. Galbraith?
Yes.
No.
Mr. Galbraith?
No, he said no.
He said no? Mr. Galbraith, can you repeat yourself?
He said yes.
Okay, yes, yes. Mr. Oliphant?
No.
Madame Châtel? Mr. Zuberi?
No.
Dr. Fry?
No.
Mr. Chong?
Yes.
Mr. Hoback?
Yes.
Mr. Epp?
Yes.
Mr. Abulative?
Oui.
Mr. Bergeron?
Oui.
Madam McPherson?
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Thank you. So we will proceed with our hearing. We now go to Mr. Bergeron. You have a minute and a half, Mr. Bergeron.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, we attempted to have discussions with the government before this meeting. And since the government presented its motion, I would like to motion that pursuant to Article 108 of the Standing Order, the diplomatic relation between India and Canada, that there's a minimum of 4 meetings to hear witnesses, and that the committee makes a report of its observations and recommendations to the House. We also have a copy in both official languages. Mr. Chair, I will continue with our witnesses. In the recent report of the Senate of International Trade, we are concerned that the General Directorate, that former members of GAC, that there is a loss of legal expertise within the department. We noticed last week when we asked questions on the Israeli-Palestinian situation, and that the government officials were incapable of telling us if, according to them, what is happening was a violation of international law and human rights. According to you, do you think there is a loss of expertise at the foreign services?
Monsieur M6.
Thank you for the question. I must say that there's no other explanation for it, frankly. The legal principles at play in occupied Palestine are so abundantly clear and well known, at least to the executive of this country, because we wax lyrical about them when it comes to Ukraine: inadmissibility of acquisition of territory through force, right of peoples to self-determination, and so on. And so, to my mind, either folks at GAC or in the PM's office don't know the law, that same law, as it applies to occupied Palestine, or otherwise playing at something altogether different, and that is being selective with international law when it serves our purposes as perceived by our government, and claiming otherwise, that we have a fidelity to it across the board. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Emsies. We next go to MP McPherson.
I'd like to raise a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
In the last round, I moved a motion, and I have the right to speak to that motion, and I actually verbally asked for the right to speak to the motion. Mr. Chong interrupted me while I was making my motion. When I asked, it's just a matter of, I need it on the record that I do have the right to speak to a motion. When I move it, it doesn't matter when it happens in a meeting. If I have the floor, I can move a motion and I can speak to it. I asked for the right to speak to it, and so I just want that on the record that I was not able to speak to it before I was interrupted and Mr. Chong was recognized.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. I disagree. I think the chair did a wonderful job in providing me the floor to move the motion to adjourn. So I think, Mr. Chair, I sustain your decision to give me the floor, at which point I move the motion to adjourn debate so we could actually hear from the witnesses that we have called today to testify about the future of diplomacy. So, Mr. Chair, I support your decision to give me the floor to adjourn debate, which I took advantage of. So I thank you for that, Mr. Chair.
On that point of order, Mr. Chair, I was not challenging your decision. I will respect your decision. I think, however, it was wrong, and I don't think it followed the rules of order that we have for this committee. That was my point. I wanted it on the record that I just hope in the future that, and it happens when any member moves a motion, it can happen at any time during their talk, and that then stops the clock on the time, and it does interrupt the witnesses, and I apologize for that, but I fear that as we end the end of session, that the analysts and et cetera could actually do some work over the holidays on a new piece of work that I think there is. We've been talking about doing Africa work for quite a while. We've been talking about not spending enough time on development. We've been talking about not spending enough time on the conflicts in the Sahel and not enough time on the...
Mr. Chair, can I have a point of order? So we don't have to do this at all right now because, of course, we already have decided as a committee that we would be studying the Israel and Palestine issues and the Iran issues, two of the motions that I had brought forward. So we won't be looking at this issue until after we come back anyway. So there is absolutely no reason for Mr. Oliphant to raise this issue at this time, and it would be much more appropriate for him to do that during a committee business meeting so that we could hear from the experts that we've brought before us today to talk about some very important issues. Now, Mr. Oliphant is only, in fact, interrupting the last speaker, which is me. So I would prefer it if he would allow...
So,
my mistake, but I would prefer that we would be able to address this. I think studying Africa is very important, but I think that's something we can do in February when we return from after having our constituency break.
And on that point of order, I just want to invite Mr. Chong to share his indignation with his colleague, conservative colleague of the Environment Committee, because that's been a recurrent issue that the conservative bring motion, and we cannot interview witnesses. Please share it.
Thank you. So, so we now go to Madam McPherson. You have a minute and a half.
Mr. Chair, and I thank all the witnesses for being here. And of course, there's always some shenanigans that happen during committees. So thank you for your patience. Mr. Msis, you spoke about the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice. Now, we know that those are two of the only options Palestinians have to actually have nonviolent or pacific dispute settlement. So would it not be in the best interests of all to utilize those mechanisms to support the ICC and the ICJ to have Canada do that support? Perhaps you could talk about that and the implications when we support those calls within Ukraine and we don't support them in other contexts like in Palestine.
You're absolutely right. We have no credibility because we take a double standard. These two courts are, as you said, the only two of the only mechanisms that can be utilized to seek justice in the situation in Palestine, and not merely for Palestinian victims, but also for Israeli ones. And it strikes one as incredible that the government of Canada would utilize those mechanisms. The ICC, indeed, Canada was at the heart of the creation of the ICC, and the ICJ now in matters concerning Iran and Syria. And yet deny the option available for the people of Palestine and other victims, including Israelis, to utilize these mechanisms. The message that sends is, no, you may not resolve this conflict through pacific means. And, by the way, if you're Palestinian, you can't use violence at all to end the occupation of your territory now going on 56 years. Occupation is meant to be a temporary circumstance. This one has lasted generations. So if you can't use violence and you can't use non-violent legal means, what else is left? This goes to Canada's credibility on the international plane. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. So we next go to, from the Conservative side, yes.
It is 1 p.m., therefore I must go. It is 1 p.m.
Mr. Chair?
There's 2 minutes left there.
Mr. Chair?
And, yes.
I move that we adjourn.
Okay.
Then they wonder why our diplomacy
Because we spent 30 hours, so I may be a little bit tired because the Conservatives spent 30 hours doing absolutely useless activity. So we may be a little bit tired and crabby. So let's just get over that.
Okay, so I will adjourn the meeting. Just before I do so. Yeah, that's true, actually. Meeting stands adjourned.